All right, Jabulani Blose is the CEO of the South African National Deaf Association. Is joining us now for the discussion on sign language becoming the 12th official language in South Africa today. And our sign language interpreter then this evening is Teriso Ndawe. Thank you very much for being with us. Let me try and do this properly. Hello, and how are you? Thank you very much for joining us here on the show. Of course, it's with great excitement that this bill has now been signed into law. Tell us about your reaction, and I suppose one would argue that this is long overdue.
Thank you for welcoming me here. So sign language becoming an official language is very important. It's a very important change in South Africa. It's long overdue, yes, but finally it has happened. And now with sign language being an official, it means that deaf people will have access to quality and information and services, and also participation. So that is very important. It's also an overwhelming win for the disability rights movement and linguistic minorities.
Yeah, and do you feel in general that the deaf community has largely been sort of marginalized and ignored? I mean, you can take a look at the fact that there are very few shows that cater to the deaf community. I'll say though that SABC in general has, I suppose, been doing a good job in catering to the deaf community. But by and large, are you of the view that the deaf community has been ignored and marginalized?
Well, one of the things I understand about a human being is independence, self-belief, and freedom. So those three important things are core values of development. But if those three things are not available for a deaf person, it's just a classic case of marginalization, which means deaf people don't have freedom to access quality information that impact on their own self-belief and identity. So in general, yes, without sign language becoming a formal language, the deaf community experience unjust discrimination.
And indeed, one can even argue that this was a discrimination and something that it was in the Bill of Rights. So in a sense, your rights were indeed trampled on, rights that are entrenched in the Constitution. And perhaps that was the route you took in getting to where you are. Would assume that it was a long road to get to the point of having this bill now being made an actual law. Take us through that law and what was needed on your side, the contribution needed on your side as the deaf community, as leadership in the deaf community, to make sure that we get to this point.
In my mind, there can be few things that can be important to begin with. One is access. Yeah. Secondly, receptive or reception. Thirdly, enabling. And fourthly, fair and just society. So those are important things that we must demand to be included now and in the future for any planning that we need to do for sign language to be implemented.
Yeah.
One thing I can add also on that is that with sign language becoming an official language now, for me as a deaf person, I can feel like I belong to my own community. I'm no longer will I doubt myself, where do I belong? And it is easy for me now to justify what that community needs. Secondly, with what happened today at Union Building, it's an affirmation, meaning that I've been affirmed as a deaf person. I'm using this sign language now which is official now. Previously, people used to say, no, don't sign, don't sign in public, you know. When you arrive to your family gatherings, you know, they say, no, don't sign. When you go to a restaurant, we are bringing attention to ourselves. Well, this is affirmation. It means now I feel free.
All right. And I mean, this obviously now gives you a greater voice to make more sort of demands that will assist the deaf community at large. You know, what's the next step from here? I mean, it's obviously a long road ahead, given that the deaf community had been for many years been marginalized. I mean, you paint a picture that's actually quite sad, that, you know, you had to kind of hide the fact that you needed to do sign language in public. So what's the next step from here? This is a victory, and what's next now?
That's very interesting, because looking around in society generally, deaf people have not been heard. So one thing we need to start with is to listen and to heal. Both ourselves as a deaf community and non-deaf people, to listen and also to heal. And the second thing we need to do is to build the bridge, the divide, hearing people and deaf people. We need to bring each other closer using important communication tools that will bridge access. And thirdly, we need to encourage development of the deaf community, because sign language is our strength and resource.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also important, you know, as broadcasters and as, you know, the national broadcaster in South Africa, for us to also maybe pose the question to you about, you know, what we can do better to serve the deaf community. And I know that, you know, there have been, you know, we've certainly in some of our news broadcasts, for example, had sign language interpreters. But in your view, what could make things better? What would be needed that would better serve the deaf community?
Well, as I mentioned previously, is to listen and to heal. That is the starting part. Now, deaf people need also to feel in control of their own lives, to lead themselves. And some programs at SABC needs deaf people to be there to control that. Sometimes you need deaf people to show their own capacity. SAB must not shy away to use that. Deaf people have those skills, but because they have not been listened to, of course, people assume that deaf people do not have skills. And also we need to be more aware that deaf can as much as do the same work as hearing people can do, given the platform and the support they can do.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm thinking that this is South Africa's. This is South Africa's first on the continent to indeed, bring this as a law that the sign language be an official language in the country. Do you think that this is something that will sort of travel on, and that will travel on to the rest of Africa? And would you perhaps be pushing for that so that it becomes something that's that's happening not only on our continent but perhaps even internationally?
Well, it can have positive impact, but you must be careful not to become like being excited today with sign language becoming official language, and then nothing happens. And then everything becomes lull. There's no development. So we must be careful, also learn from experience. The other 3 countries in Africa that have already approved sign language, what happened there? So we must not be the same like that.
What happened? What happened? Maybe you can explain to us.
Well, quite honestly, with South Africa having sign language official today, we are far better with what's happening out there. And I do believe that they have a lot to learn from us. And one important thing here in South Africa, we have the technology. Right now, communication technology, it is the way for deaf people to bridge the communication divide and create a huge access for deaf people.
And I mean, how does this change, your role as the CEO of the National Deaf Association of South Africa?
Well, it is an exciting change. If you are not creative enough to change, then you get passed by the time. For us, what is important is to introduce new technology to ensure that what happened today, with sign language becoming official language, this bring real meaningful change in the lives of deaf people. That can only happen with technology. During the COVID pandemic, we learned that technology plays a huge important role with remote communication, remote work. So those things impacted on deaf people also. So yes, technology, it is the way to go.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us this evening here on the late edition. And Teresa, I think you can help me here. How do I say thank you?
Thank you.
Oh, very easy. All right. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. And I'm really happy for you that this has finally happened.